Hello, Anja Angels, and welcome to another vlog where we are going to discuss things that Amelia, our amazing head of community, who is also a certified doula and mom of one, wishes she knew before having a baby. So I have a couple of questions today, and we're going to go through them and just discuss things that a lot of other parents we've seen wish that they knew before birth and how Amelia feels about them as both a parent and a doula. So thanks so much, Amelia, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cool. So just in general, we're going to start off with, what do you wish you knew before birth as both a parent and a doula?
I think this is a hard question to ask. I think as a doula, I've seen so many different things before I went into birth with my daughter. So I felt like I was kind of an experienced parent who was on my fourth baby by the time I had everything. I think we'll try to explain the intensity of all of it, but until you're really in that moment, you don't understand how vulnerable and intense everything feels. And I think I did a pretty good job of having good boundaries in place prior to her birth, even going through the prenatal period. I think the things that surprised me actually were pretty far into postpartum. But the actual birth experience, this is gonna sound weird, but I actually thought it was easier and more fun than I thought it was going to be. So I'm probably not the best person to ask that question.
Yeah, no, one of my favorite things about hearing about your birth story is that you felt a sense of euphoria since you had an unmedicated birth, and I thought that was so interesting. Really cool.
Yeah, I think some of the emotions and feelings that you feel in the middle of it, it's just not something you can really anticipate. And the experience, I think, is just so vastly different for each family. I'm really glad though, prenatally, having been through so many births before with so many families, understanding, kind of seeing the things that pushed people into choosing a medicated birth. And I am really thankful that I just approached it with a level of flexibility that allowed me to, just make choices in the spur of the moment that were right for our family. So I'm glad that I didn't while I had preferences, I didn't have very many rigid boxes. So yeah.
Cool. Well, talking about postpartum in general and the fact that there was a lot of surprises in postpartum, one big thing that a lot of parents describe that they wish that they knew before birth and before having a baby was changes in their pelvic floor and how they should respond to it. So how have you seen pelvic floor changes, especially if you're comfortable talking about it, and how do you think parents should navigate changes with their pelvic floor that they experience?
I think it should be routine that every parent who has a baby should see a pelvic floor therapist. That's a hill I'll die on any day. Just because of the monumental changes. Your body is expanding, your pelvis expands, there's so much relaxin and hormones in your body that it's just impossible for it not to change and to feel completely different on the other side of it. I think I expected to have to do some pelvic floor healing post-birth. I feel like I've been very lucky in that front, in that I have had a very strong pelvic floor from day one. Never really dealt with the classic symptoms of leaking bladder and a million other things that people experience with their pelvic floor, where they just struggle to just have any muscle tone. But I did see a pelvic floor therapist actually within the last year. I planned to see one within the first 6 months, and then I didn't. And then later I was just feeling so much tension more. I felt like my whole pelvis was so tense. I would just get up and feel really sore. And I was I don't feel like I like the way this feels. And so I actually went and saw a pelvic floor therapist. And she was yeah, your whole muscle system is really, really tight. So I ended up going to pelvic floor therapy to loosen the muscles rather than tighten them up, which is kind of the opposite. And I think what had happened is, through my pregnancy and everything, I focused a lot on the core of how everything felt. And it's very similar to my immediate healing post-birth is my midwife was I had some small tears. I had like 3 stitches. Was nothing too big of a deal. I healed so well that I had to go back in and have recorrective surgery to open like things up where I had healed and fused together. Like I had scar tissue basically in this section. And then they had to loosen it back up, which was my fault in some way, because they were like, oh, well, you rested too much in the first couple weeks, and so like everything just fused together, which it was not too big of a deal. Like it was a fairly quick OB outpatient surgery, and then we first tried to deal with it with some like estrogen cream to see if it would like loosen up the scar tissue. Yeah, that didn't happen. And so I was just like, all right, we're just gonna go in and like have it snipped, and it was fine. Like it was very easy to correct, but it was quite frustrating at the moment. But it did end up getting me more postpartum visits with my OB and midwife, so I really can't complain too much. So yeah.
Cool.
But back to like anything pelvic floor, like I would just say, like if something feels off as a parent, or like you just want to like make sure that everything's good, it's always a good idea to ask for a referral to a pelvic floor therapist. They're fantastic people and have a lot of tools to help you feel like your most confident self after having a baby.
Yeah, I feel like people don't talk enough about the fact that pelvic floor issues are so common, even like amongst my friends that haven't given birth. Like I know quite a few people that have pelvic floor issues, so I think it's actually really common, especially after birth, but even beforehand. So it's really all normal. Cool. Well, another concern that folks have brought up about things that they wish that they knew before birth is how to navigate parenting and splitting responsibilities there, especially because earlier on, of course, breastfeeding and things like that can make it feel uneven. So I think something that's really interesting about your parenting situation is how you decided to split parenting. So how do you currently split parenting between yourself and your partner, and how do you recommend folks navigate that discussion?
I think this is going to look so vastly different for every single family, so I kind of struggle with portraying any black and white feeling, but I think that if at any point you feel like there's an imbalance, you have to learn how to communicate that really, really well. Early on in the early days of breastfeeding, you are likely the default parent, and that doesn't always have to exist that way. Like as you're breastfeeding, like your partner can take on diaper changes, or can take, feeding a bottle in the middle of the night so that you can get a longer stretch of rest, that sort of thing. For the first, I would say 2 years, I did a lot of the default parenting, just because it came very naturally to me and I loved it. And then Eli slowly took on more sleeping at night with Esme if she needed, like when she was sick or whatever, he would just like cuddle her and sit up with her more. And then as she got older and she was weaned, which we weaned her at 2 years, 4 months. So we got past the 2-year mark, which was a journey. And Eli was actually the one who suggested that I wean. I probably would have gone a little bit longer happily, but I felt like I was kind of losing my identity into that role of breastfeeding and like being a parent, and it was affecting my mental health a little bit at that point, where I was just like, I feel like I'm tied to this, and every waking moment, like I have a child at the breast, and she's always been one to like really enjoy all the snuggles and everything, and so we just transitioned away from it, and it was really healthy, and it was a great time to do it for us. And then after that, it just opened up so many more things. Like I could travel with friends or go on work trips, and he stepped into that role as like a dad so much more confidently at that point, and really took on, feeding her meals and putting her down for naps and putting her to bed at night, because we transitioned from at that point to, since I wasn't breastfeeding her right before bed, when I was breastfeeding her right before bed, obviously it was the default for me to just put her down after I had breastfed her. But once he was more involved in that, we started transitioning to like every other night we would switch on and off, and so no one was carrying the entire mental load. And now, like, we both work remote, and so our lives are just very flexible in this moment. If I have a lot of meetings, he takes her, and we just kind of play it day by day. Some weeks I care for her more, some weeks he does. And things have just really evened out into a system where, you know, household chores and like caregiving, meal prep, all of that has just become very like equally balanced, and I feel very lucky in that department. But for any family who is looking at, you know, how do you break chores up? How do you break childcare up? I think sitting down and looking at the spaces where you feel like a default parent, maybe making note of those, and the places where you don't have to be the default parent, you can allow that to kind of fall into the other parent's shoulders. And yeah, I mean, I think there's just going to be, you know, caregiver roles for some families. For some families, it could be the complete opposite. Maybe the mom goes back to work immediately and the dad takes on that default parent role. So yeah, it can look so vastly different family to family.
One thing that a lot of parents wish that they knew before birth is around breastfeeding specifically, and especially mental health challenges that can come with breastfeeding. So how did you prepare for breastfeeding? And then also, what would be your advice to parents that are wanting to be prepared when it comes to specifically mental health challenges related to breastfeeding?
Yeah, so breastfeeding itself is a full-time job, right? The number of hours that you spend dedicated sitting and breastfeeding, you know, 10 to 15, 20 minutes at a time, but then you're dealing with cluster feeding in the early days, and you're really just getting to know your body and your baby. And I think that for a lot of folks, there's not enough tools and resources ahead of time, but it's one of those challenging pieces because you can practice, but for even between babies with the same parent, like there can be wildly different experiences with breastfeeding just based on the baby. So there's just kind of a lot of moving pieces. And so you can practice like all the different holds and understand the general concept, but until you're holding your own baby, like you're not going to know 100% what it's going to feel and look like for you. I think there's definitely like distinct benefits to breastfeeding in that, like, you know, you can feed on the go and you always have food with you and you don't have to think about cleaning bottles and all those things. But by breastfeeding, you are choosing to be the default parent for that period of time. So it's something to be aware of, just like the time commitment that you're placing into. I think it's helpful to take it moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month, until you're where you want to be. The World Health Organization recommends breastfeeding until 2 years old. That's a global recommendation just to like help babies get their best start at life. But you know, we do have modern tools like formula and other options for feeding, so we're not stuck. And I think that the most important thing for parents to think about when they're coming forward with the plan to breastfeed is it's okay if you change your mind, and you're not less of a parent by any means if the mental challenges of feeding your baby at the breast are just like not happening. Some people it comes really, really naturally and it just flows. And for other people there's, you know, there can be things like inverted nipples and tongue ties and lip ties and babies with gastrointestinal issues and reflux and babies with like almost a form of intolerance to the proteins in breast milk. And it's impossible to like reckon with all of those different pieces. And I just wish that parents had better access to trained professionals like IBCLCs who can come in and help them get that really good start. I know a lot of wonderful like mommy baby friendly hospitals are doing really well with like getting everyone a lactation visit. And for me, when I was starting breastfeeding, I was so thankful to have a lactation consultant who came into the room and just told me everything's looking great, you're doing great, there's nothing dramatically that needs to change. And also my midwife, as soon as Esme was born, gave me a nipple shield, which, because I had slightly inverted nipples, and she was like, it's gonna be impossible for her to latch, so just here's a nipple shield. And I already knew how to use it because I'd helped a lot of families use them in the past, and so it wasn't as big of a challenge. And Esme and I used the nipple shield till she was around 4 months old, and her mouth got big enough that she could nurse properly without it, and we just stopped using it and we moved on with our lives. And we went on to have, you know, like I said, a successful 2-year, 4-month breastfeeding relationship. And yeah, I wish that more parents had, you know, the resources to know, you know, if you're struggling with mental health, sometimes you just need more support in that goal. If you're really determined, like, I really want to do this, seek more support. If someone's giving you advice, just stop or whatever, you don't have to completely stop breastfeeding. You can just supplement with other sources, whether it's formula or pumped milk. There's a plethora of options, and if that's really important to you. I've also seen moms like plagued with guilt because they feel like they're failing their baby if they decide to stop breastfeeding, and nothing could be further from the truth. Your baby is being fed. As long as your baby's growing and thriving, you're doing the best that you can in that situation. You're more than enough. And, I hope you feel like you have the support that you need in whatever choices you make, and that your community supports you well in those spaces as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like a big part of why there are mental health issues when it comes to breastfeeding is like a lot of people have identity crises, and I've been reading through a lot around like what parents wish that they knew before having a baby, and a lot of it has to do with just changing identity and just identity crises in general. So what kind of identity crises have you seen, and what kind of solutions do you propose folks try to navigate that?
Something that stood out to me a long time ago was this TED Talk where this woman talked about matrescence, and the theory of matrescence, right, is that when you have a baby, when you go through pregnancy and childbirth and the postpartum, it's very similar to going through puberty. There's just like these floods of hormones that hit your body. And just think about who you were as a child before you went through puberty, and then reimagine that as you going through that same like level of personal identity change as going through puberty to becoming a parent. And that's this very similar sort of like identity shift. Like your priorities change, the things that you notice about the world, everything shifts. The way things smell and the way that things taste, like literally everything changes. And I remember seeing that and being so grateful that I knew and could anticipate that sort of change. It's similar to like, I feel like for me, like even having this conversation with parents is similar to like your mom having to talk with you and saying like, you're gonna get your period and this is what you can expect. I wish that people had more conversations about that when it came to like pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, postpartum, and all the challenges and identity shifts that happen that way. Your world shifts from being about you to being about another little person. And it's not always going to be that way. There's going to be some point in your life where your child is independent and autonomous and living their own life. But it's like your heart is walking outside your body and you're constantly aware of where they're at in the world and what they're doing. And I don't think that I'm 3.5 years into this, right? But I don't think that feeling's ever going to go away. Even when Esme becomes an adult, I feel like I'm always going to be aware of her and her presence in the world. And I think that every parent experiences that. And I wish that there was more conversation about just the shifts in identity that come with being a parent. And you're gonna miss the old you. You're gonna miss your freedom and flexibility. You're gonna miss sleeping in on the weekends. And dads are going to experience this too. And I think sometimes dads don't anticipate it even in a worse way than the mother, but to some extent they still have a level of flexibility often, just by default, at least in our society. But there's still, challenges of, who you were before, that slow, easy Sunday morning where you roll out of bed at noon and you make pancakes and drink coffee and waddle down to the farmer's market at 1 p.m. Those days are long gone. The kid's gonna be up by 6:30 every morning, and it doesn't matter if it's the weekend, and screw you when it's daylight savings time. If you need therapy to navigate those adjustments well, I think these are some of the like mental health crises, things that trigger those sometimes. Just realizing that you're not autonomous for a little bit. Your baby's always going to need you and your alone time. So you have to be very intentional about it. And from your partner, from your family, from your friends, like ask for what you need when it comes to like taking care of yourself. Do things that you used to love to do. You can still do them. If you used to love to go hiking, have someone watch your baby and go hiking. Like, do it. There's things that you can build into your life, and it may take a little bit till you're ready to do that. It may take a little bit till you have someone that you trust to be able to do those things. But if you loved going out with your friends, go out with your friends. It's going to help you feel like you have, a sense of who you were and don't feel completely lost into the role of being a parent.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned postpartum and pregnancy in general being akin to puberty. Like, things like your taste and smell can change. And one thing that I've been reading about that more parents wish they knew before birth is just their change in both food appetite and smell, especially right after birth. So what kind of shifts do you typically notice in parents and especially yourself?
I don't know. I haven't had very many conversations about this with like other parents, but one thing that I did notice that I guess is something that I didn't realize really, I think it's something that you kind of realize yourself, but it's not really something you like ask a friend about, but the smell of your sweat changes after you have a baby permanently.
Whoa.
Who knows what caused it? It's like, it's not bad. It's not a bad change. It's just different. It's like, oh, that's kind of weird.
Does it still smell like BO?
Yeah, but like it does. It's just a like slight undertone, right? Like if it used to smell like roses, now it smells like cardamom or something. I don't know. Like it's just different, and it's not bad. It's not anything distinct where it's like, oh my gosh, like whatever. But I think it's like it's part of like the hormonal shift that you go through. And it's kind of semi-permanent. Taste of food absolutely changed. Like the things that I like changed dramatically. Like
interesting.
I've always loved very bitter things, still love very, very bitter things, but I used not to be able to handle handle spicy things, and now like I love spicy food, and that happened when I was pregnant and it stuck around. So I think it's like your taste buds change probably as you age, has some effect on it too, but the things that you like, you might find that you like things. So maybe try something that you always thought that you didn't like. Try it again after you have a baby.
How did the spiciness thing happen? Did it happen? You craved it during pregnancy, or were you eating it to try and induce labor?
No, I started craving spicy ramen. So that's what happened. Spicy ramen, and then like spicy tacos. Which we were in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and there was a taco truck that had pretty spicy tacos. Like, oh, that sounded so good one night. And so, I think like that's how I noticed it. I ate spicy food for my entire pregnancy, but I'd never noticed a correlation between spicy food and like Braxton Hicks or like going into labor. But there's a pizza place in the Bay Area that everyone talks about. They have a spicy pizza that supposedly puts everyone into labor. I'm just like, I don't know. It's a theory, but yeah.
Cool. Well, I know you discussed dads earlier, so I wanted to create a space for just different types of pregnant parents and expecting parents in general, like single parents and gay parents and trans parents, and also dads, because I feel like a lot of pregnancy content is just geared directly towards moms. And as we know with our conversation with the Welcome to Fatherhood founder, dads, there's just not a lot of dad content. Dads tend to be left out of the conversation when it comes to preparing for birth. So what do you think are things that you wish more dads knew prior to having a baby that would be helpful for them in the future?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about dads that I've worked with and the dads of today is that they're stepping up in ways that dads have never stepped up before. Millennial and Gen Z parents are spending significantly more time with their children on a day-to-day basis, and I love to see it. I think something that Eli mentioned to me early on was like he was very surprised at how jealous he felt of the baby having and monopolizing all of my time. Because when you're a dad or like the alternate partner of the person who had the baby, right? You become, the attention is just split right in two. And where you used to be able to just sit and cuddle on the couch, it's like, oh, I have to go feed the baby, and I have to go like give the baby a bath and give them a diaper or whatever. And early on, it's super common for dads to not feel like I've seen dads on both sides who feel immediate bonding with their baby, and they're just like, this is my baby, and they, would do anything for them. And I think any dad would do anything for the baby, but it could take a little while to feel like you have a connection to this person. You didn't have this person like living inside you for 9 months, you may feel the baby kick, but it's just a little bit different. And I have no idea what that's like. I can only imagine. And I remember the day that I noticed that Eli and Esme had a bond, and he was just like sitting on the couch with her, and she was just sprawled out like all over him, just like asleep and kind of snoring. And I noticed that he had like tears in his eyes, and he was just like, it's so sweet. And then after that, he started putting her down for naps by like walking the house with her, and it just kind of grew from there. And today they have one of the strongest bonds of any like parent and child that I've ever observed and seen, and it's just like really special. And I think that it's okay as a dad to or a partner of the birthing person to know that it can take a little bit of time to bond with your baby, and do what you can to support the partner that you do feel connected to, and just keep trying, keep holding the baby, keep being present. I think in similar ways, when dads are around their babies, their testosterone levels drop. So there's a hormonal shift that happens for dads too that's not talked about very often.
Yeah.
And so there's shifts in the entire family dynamic and the entire family identity. And I look forward to seeing how research kind of dives into that more, so that we understand more about those spaces.
Why does the testosterone drop?
You don't need it as much by evolution, I guess.
Because you already have a baby?
I think it's probably, I think it's, I can't remember the exact reason that the study theorized around, but it's similar to just probably somewhat by, sleep changes, but also your exposure to other hormones in the whole space. People who are doulas, who've had babies before, will go to a birth and they're around the birth space and they start lactating, things like that. So there's they're definitely exposed to hormones in some ways. So yeah, I think that there's probably needs to be more research into the why behind it, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned developing a connection, because I feel especially dads struggle with that, but I know that moms and other parents do as well. So yeah, one thing that I read about that more parents wish they knew about was just how to develop that connection with their baby. And I think just even a milestone to look forward to, I've read things along the lines of around 6 to 8 weeks, your baby could start smiling. I mean, it's really that they're passing gas, but even the idea of them smiling helps people create that connection. So it's at least something that they can look forward to. So what's your general take on that, and just things that they can look forward to or use as coping mechanisms?
Yeah, when a baby's born, they're kind of like a potato, right? They make a little noise and they squirm around and they eat and they poop and pee, and that's about it. They grunt and they burp and all of those things, right? But they're kind of like a potato. They don't have any personality yet that's visible to the world. And it takes a little while to get to know them and who they are as an individual and a human, and they're just so dependent on you. It's kind of, they're cute and all, but they're kind of like a potato. So it takes a little bit for a lot of people to feel, I think even it took me a little bit to get to know Esme. I think I felt a very strong connection to her immediately, and I was that's my baby. I could tell, but I remember she started smiling pretty early on, and she definitely her vision, baby's vision isn't super clear, right? But I would talk and she would smile, and that's when things start to shift. You're okay, she could just be passing gas or feeling gassy, but she's reacting to me, And so that happened early on, but I know it's different for every baby too when that actually happens. But I know that was a distinct, I remember that as a distinct moment of wow, you're a human. And then as they get older, and 6 months, they start doing things. They start interacting with you differently. They start playing with toys. They start being slightly less dependent on you for every little thing. They can sit and they can play independently for a little bit and practice that. And you start to see little glimpses of who they're going to be. And it becomes easier, I think. So it's okay if it takes a little bit of time. I think, it's probably expected for a lot of people that it's just going to feel default, automatically, everything. I'm just going to feel so connected to this baby. But I think for any parent, it can take a little bit of time to feel like you know who they are. You can feel connected to them genetically, right? But to feel those feelings of love and bonding, it can take a little bit, yeah. There shouldn't be any shame around that at all.
Yeah. Thinking about different types of parents, one piece of advice that I feel like is usually understated is how to navigate being a single parent. Have you ever supported a family that is a single parent or just has an untraditional nuclear family structure, and how do you think they best prepared for it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I've supported quite a few families who are single parent homes or non-traditional family structures. It's all in the support that you build around you, whether it's your family or friends, having a doula, having, a baby nurse, having whatever you need around you. I know that that's also can feel like a bit of a privilege for some folks. It can feel, it's not always as straightforward as it should be. In our society and culture, we, to some extent, have lost that foundational societal just care for each other. And so if you're a parent who doesn't have a co-parent, try and build as much community around you as possible. Connect with other single parents if that helps. Finding local community is going to get you through. And the single parents that I know are some of the strongest people I know. They have, sometimes go long stretches with no breaks, and they do everything by default. And I always just admire their tenacity to put their children first, and just the strength that it takes. But if you're a single parent, I wish I could give you a big hug, first of all, because it's a lot. But if you can find community, to find ways to find yourself again and to feel, like you have some self-care space and feel like you have a support structure. I would wish that for every single parent.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to touch on today was what your tips are for building community, especially if you're a lower income family, because the CDC published the study this year that 4 in 5 pregnancy-related deaths are preventable, which is crazy, and the leading cause is mental health issues. So Amelia and I talk a lot about community and building community for yourself as a parent, which is why we offer our own community for parents, especially parents that bank and such, but even those that don't. So what are your general tips on building community as a parent, especially, if you're looking for more accessible options?
Yeah, this can be very dependent on your local space, right? I always prefer and encourage people towards local community because there's nothing like in-person support. Someone to actually bear the burden with you and help carry you through, whether that's bringing you meals, helping you with house care, child care, all of those things, even taking your dog for a walk. Those sorts of things can be really helpful in the early days of parenthood and even years into parenthood. So local community in my, is number one. It's paramount, right? If you're in a more rural space, it can be really hard to find local community with, folks who, maybe have the same parenting style as you or, have the same goals out of life and where you feel safe around them. Going to local parks can be a great way to meet new parents. It could be hard if you're introverted to go up to a random person at the park and say hey, introduce yourself. And, but some of the people who very early on helped me just have other people around were people that I met at parks and like get-togethers. Of course, we were kind of in the middle of COVID too, so people were much more cautious, and there are a lot more community opportunities available today than there were several years ago just because of the COVID pandemic. But finding spaces where people can come around you, even if you're low income, there are a lot of community-based resources. And if you need any help finding a low-income community-based resource, please reach out to us in our community. Like, we would love to connect you with the things that we do know about. Online community is beautiful too. It can, you can connect with people who have a like-minded, purpose as you, like the same vision for your family. It's behind a screen, I understand that, but some of my dearest friends like live miles and miles away, and so you connect on Zoom or FaceTime and you have those conversations and you see each other in person more rarely, but those relationships can still exist. And there's incredible support groups for being a parent if you're looking for a specific resource around, maybe you're breaking some generational patterns and trying to raise your children differently than you were raised, or like from the default of like what you kind of know, and you want to like raise them with a different pattern or a different structure. Finding online spaces where there are the same visions that you can like practice those things with other parents. For me, myself, like I'm in a lot of ex-fundamentalist parenting groups because I'm wanting to consciously raise my child in a different environment than the way I was raised. And I know that I'm not going to be able to find a lot of people who are in that very like niche part of society, just like at the park or, at the corner, like it's just more rare. And so I do connect with parents like that in online spaces and attend online support groups for things like that. So I think there's a role, but having your own, in-person support group, whether that's family or friends or just like random moms that you're like, put in a Facebook group with your local area and say like, these are the values that I want to raise my children under, and I'm looking for friends who have the same. I did that when I just recently moved across the country. I posted on Reddit and I was like, hey, I want parent friends that have, have the same values and like want to raise their children in this particular way, and also value science and the world around us, and want to go like hiking and enjoy like outdoor spaces. And connected with like 6 other parents, and of those 6 have met up multiple times with like 2 families and have made very good friends that, as time goes on, I'm excited, but like we meet up on the weekends and go hike or bike somewhere and then go to brunch. And that's how you can build like those friendships. And they were also looking for community. So there's people out there. I think it's just like, you have to be very intentional about like where you put your efforts and where you put your focus to like connect in those spaces.
Cool. Yeah, those are really good tips and super interesting. Okay, cool. Well, I have like 5 more questions, but they're not that connected, like overbearing parents, newborn clothes, going to the bathroom feeling different right after birth, and and then exhaustion tips. So should we just do like a lightning round situation? Because also we have that call with John. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, to close this vlog out, I wanted to do a quick lightning round on some hot topics that I've seen parents talk a lot about, and there's a lot of confusion around them. So we'll do a quick lightning round on these random topics, and just let me know what your first thing that comes to mind, what your tips are for it. So number 1, how to track naps.
Apps. There's all the apps online. Track it with an app. If you're wanting to be more flexible than that, you also don't have to track it. I hate to break it, but you don't have to track it if you don't want to. You can just let the baby nap when the baby naps. I found it very helpful to track in the first like 2 months, everything. Diapers, breastfeeding sessions, like all of those things. And then once we felt like we were on a good trajectory and we kind of had a routine, I didn't track anymore. But apps in the early days are, cool. There's some great ones out there. I think like the one that I used was, I don't even remember. I think it was through my breast pump company or something.
Yeah.
I'll look it up. I'll link it in the comments.
Cool. 3 tips to deal with exhaustion after having a baby.
Outsource as much as you can. Ask for what you need. So if you need to have a connected sleep cycle and you're just like, I'm reaching the brink, like you need to be very upfront with your partner and say, I need you to take XYZ time and chunk it out. That can look very different for different people, but definitely try to at least a couple times a week. I know everyone says it, sleep when the baby sleeps, and it's like, oh, but there's a million things to do around the house. Sleep when the baby sleeps 2 times a week. That can make it a little bit more like structural for you. Sleep when the baby sleeps. You know, if you're used to, it's hard, like 2 times a week, go to bed when the baby goes to bed. If it's 7 p.m., like go ahead and go to bed then too. I know you're going to want your alone time, so don't feel bad if you can't do it every time, but try and build it into your life a couple times a week.
Cool. Advice for moms dealing with, or advice for pregnant parents dealing with overbearing families.
Stick to your boundaries. With your partner, sit down and write down what you want it to look like. And my advice is for your respective family, present the boundaries, make them very clear, make them very expected. You're the expert on your family, right? You're gonna know how your parents are, what they do, how they structure their lives, right? So you're gonna have a much better idea. Then it avoids putting your partner as like the bad guy in the person, or the bad guy in the situation. So, you know, if there's a boundary that you want to have, you just have to be really clear about it and then stick to your guns. A lot of people like me didn't want their mom in the room while they give birth. It's a very common boundary that a lot of people have. Some people want their mom, but not their mother-in-law. Some people want their mother-in-law, but not their mom. And it's all, it can be a little bit of a juggle. So give yourself a lot of grace if you're figuring it out. Sometimes you get to the point where like a parent oversteps a boundary or a family member oversteps a boundary and you have to like go back and say, look, I was really bad about not upholding this boundary that I set with you before, but I want to acknowledge that, and like this is like restate the boundary. And therapy can really help with this if you're dealing with like a lot of different structural situations in families and navigating them. Having somebody that you can just like talk to about it can really help.
How did going to the bathroom change after giving birth?
I remember the first time I went to the bathroom, I was like, rug burn. It felt like a rug burn. And I was a little bit surprised by that. I knew that there had been a little bit of tearing, but it wasn't too big of a deal. Thankfully, like the first time I went to the restroom after having Esme, the first time I peed, it was just like rug burn, but I still had a little bit of lidocaine in my system, so that helped a lot. When you're going to the bathroom after having a baby, when you make your first bowel movement, it can feel very scary, and a lot of people talk about this extensively, right? Take the stool softeners, breathe through it like you're pushing. So it's gonna kind of go back to those like original things, and it's gonna feel different based on how your body kind of like fared during birth. Like if you had extensive tearing, it may be more intense. Have a support person there to help talk you through it if you feel comfortable with that. If you don't, try and just like be use one of those squatty potty stools.
Yeah.
Those are awesome for birth. Like if you're pregnant, you need one. Just go buy one. They're like $10 at Bed Bath & Beyond, which is going out of business, but Amazon it. It's a necessity, and you can use that same structure. It can take a little bit, but it's okay. Just like breathe through it.
Does it go back to normal eventually?
Oh yeah. Within like a month, everything was pretty much relatively normal. With like I had minimal. I think I had stage 2 tearing or something like that. So there was like a little bit of tearing, but nothing too extensive. Like I did need a couple stitches, but they were like the quick dissolving stitches. And yeah, everything goes back to normal, thankfully, for me at least. For some folks, if it doesn't go back to normal, this is where your pelvic floor therapy is going to come into play. You're going to want to go in and see your pelvic floor therapist after like 6 weeks if things haven't returned to normal.
Okay, cool. Okay, 2 last questions. Some people discuss the fact that when they're giving birth, or some pregnant parents, when they're giving birth, discuss the fact that they just don't feel like they can keep going at a certain point. So if parents reach that point, what is your advice for them?
Change what you're doing.
Okay.
So if you feel like I can't do this anymore, right? It could be a really good sign that you're progressing. I remember having that moment when I went into transition, and I thought that I was like 5 centimeters, and it had only been like an hour since I had been checked previously for like to see like how dilated I was. And I had just progressed so quickly that I was already in transition, but I didn't realize I was in transition. And so if you feel like you can't keep going, change what you're doing. So like if you're laying in bed on your side with a peanut ball, maybe get up and go sit on the toilet, go sit in the shower, change it up, maybe change how you're sitting, because sometimes like that can just like shift things. Also, you might want to get checked again if you feel like something has changed. Exhaustion is very real during birth, and it's okay to like, if you're feeling just like you can't go anymore, to take some time and try and rest. You can lay on your side with a peanut ball between your legs, have your partner rub your back, turn on some quiet meditative music, and just close your eyes in between contractions. That can help a lot. You don't have to move your entire birth without taking time to rest. It's good to move, but like you should take time to rest if you need to as well. But hot water or warm water can be a game changer in those moments. But yeah, when I went through transition, I remember feeling like, oh, I need to get an epidural. Like this is too much. Like I feel like I'm coming apart. And then my midwife was like, you're pushing. And so I was like, oh wait, but I'm not allowed to push because like I'm not complete yet, but I was complete by far at that point. And I just didn't realize it. So sometimes things can progress very quickly towards the end of labor and kind of take you by surprise, which isn't always a bad thing. It can be very fun and exciting.
Cool. Last question of our lightning round. What do you wish more parents knew about how their birth team treats them?
You should be treated like royalty during your birth. Every parent should be treated like royalty. You are the queen or king of the situation. And if at any point during your birth you feel like you're not being listened to, not being heard, you're being disrespected, this can even happen, anytime during pregnancy, I would say. Ideally, by the time you get to your birth space, you trust your provider and your birth team explicitly to have your best interest in mind, to understand what your goals are and push alongside you to those goals. If at any point you feel like that's not happening, you need to have someone on your team, whether that's your partner or your doula, who can pump the brakes and say, whoa. Like this is not okay. Like you still have to respect this birthing person. Yeah. You should not be the one needing to feel disrespect or feel, someone pushing against your goals during your birth. You need to be able to be in the moment and just everything be very zen if possible. So building during your pregnancy a supportive birth team who's around you, who understands what your preferences are, who will go to bat for you, and who will help you achieve whatever goal within the realm of whatever their personal comfort of safety is. Because I think there is an aspect, if something is changing, you need to have that trust inherently built in your provider so that you know that they have your best interest in mind. And I think this goes back to the earlier question of the preventability of most birth incidents or the end in death, right? First of all, we have very few checkpoints through pregnancy and birth as it is, and even the postpartum in the US. That needs to increase. If you feel like you need a 2-week postpartum checkup and the next one is until 6 weeks, call and demand it and say, I need this checkup, like something isn't right. Like, unfortunately, we have to be our own voice. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish that the system was our voice for us, right? And like that there were proper checks and balances to make sure that people got the support that they need. But there's a lot of, complications and things that can happen. I think if you look at the data of like when maternal mortality happens, I think we could put a chart over the video of like what that looks like. 17% of those deaths are on the day of birth, and then a large majority of them are within the first 6 weeks post-birth. And that can include hemorrhages and infections and a million other things, right? So the American medical system as a whole needs to build more checks and balances in place to make sure that people are checked more frequently. And it's a failure of the system primarily. I think the default that we obviously want to do is like look at like, oh, these births are preventable, and place the blame of that on the parents when the blame needs to be placed on the system that doesn't support parents well. So
yeah,
that's a very short synopsis, but it's a hill I'll die on.
Cool. Okay, well, thanks so much everyone and to Amelia for attending this session where we go over things that parents should know before having a baby. So until next time, bye.
Bye.